Jaden, a young black boy from a neighborhood that seldom sees hope, has always lived in the shadows of others' expectations. Known for his quiet strength and resilience, he's learned to survive on his own terms. But when a seemingly innocent gesture sets off a chain of events, Jaden finds himself tangled in a dangerous world he never knew existed. Beneath the surface of his everyday life, secrets are waiting to be uncovered, secrets that could shatter everything he's ever known. Will Jaden rise above, or will the weight of his reality pull him under? The city hummed softly in the late afternoon. It was one of those rare moments when the sun slipped through the haze of pollution, casting an orange glow over everything. The streets, usually chaotic, filled with honking cars and bustling people, seemed quieter today. The world, it seemed, was holding its breath. The concrete sidewalks, slick from the afternoon rain, shimmered like glass. Puddles formed shallow reflections of the towering buildings that boxed in the small urban world. Jaden walked down the street, his footsteps muffled against the wet pavement. He was an unremarkable figure in a world that didn't have time to notice people like him, young, black, with a pair of old sneakers that seemed to have witnessed too much. His head was lowered slightly, eyes fixed on the sidewalk, not because he was lost in thought, but because he had learned early that keeping to the edges of the world was the safest place for someone like him. There was a rhythm to the way he moved, practiced. The movements were small, deliberate, with the air of someone who had learned to avoid attention. It wasn't about being shy or timid. It was about survival. To stay unnoticed, to blend in. Jaden had learned that people didn't see him unless he made himself visible. And when they did, it was often with suspicion, fear, or worse, ignorance. He didn't want to deal with any of that today, or any day, for that matter. As he passed the row of small shops that lined the street, his gaze briefly lifted. He spotted the old store he'd frequented since he was a little boy, a small, dimly lit shop with mismatched shelves and dusty cans of goods. Mr. Ellis' corner store was painted in chipped letters above the door. It wasn't much, but it was familiar. Safe. The kind of place where, even if you didn't have enough to pay, the elderly shopkeeper might give you a free bottle of water if he saw you were thirsty enough. Jaden didn't go in today. His pockets were light, and there were other things on his mind. His attention drifted to the sidewalk ahead of him, where something caught his eye. It was small, but unmistakable. A wallet. A black leather wallet lay abandoned on the ground, its edges worn from time and use. The sight of it made Jaden pause. He looked around. The street was quiet, too quiet. No one else was nearby. Just the black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the golden glow of the setting sun. The hum of its engine was barely audible, but it was there, idling, almost as if waiting. Jaden's heart skipped a beat. Something about that SUV made him uneasy. The vehicle looked expensive, sleek, out of place in his world. He hesitated, glancing back down at the wallet. His instincts kicked in. He had seen people drop wallets before, but there was always something different about the way this one sat there, so perfect, so deliberately left behind. A strange tension hung in the air. Something fell off. Yet, his eyes flickered to the wallet again. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The temptation to pick it up, to see if there was anything valuable inside, was undeniable. But there was also that other feeling, the feeling that said to keep walking, to ignore the temptation, to leave things untouched. But his curiosity won out. Jaden reached down, fingers brushing the leather. As he lifted it, he checked over his shoulder once more, just to be sure. The SUV hadn't moved, but he didn't know why that unsettled him more than it should have. It was just a car, just a wallet. Or was it? He slipped the wallet into his pocket, a quick motion, his eyes darting back to the parked vehicle. But before he could make a move to leave, the engine of the SUV roared to life. The vehicle slowly pulled out from its spot, rolling past Jaden. For a split second, their eyes met. Just for a moment, a glance through the tinted window. Jaden felt the weight of that stare on him, though he couldn't make out any details about the person inside. The SUV turned the corner and was gone. Jaden exhaled, almost as if he'd been holding his breath the whole time. He stood there for a moment, still feeling the unease settle in his chest like a lead weight. He hadn't imagined it. He knew someone had been watching him. But for now, it didn't matter. He was just a boy with a wallet. With his heart still pounding, Jaden kept walking. His pace was faster now, but he didn't quite know why. The path he took led him further down the street, toward his apartment, toward home. As he neared the familiar block of run-down buildings, the unsettling thought crossed his mind again. The wallet was in his pocket, the feel of it oddly reassuring, yet there was something dark lurking underneath the surface. He tried to shake off the feeling. He needed the money. His mom had been on him about bills, and though they never had much, it was always just enough to get by. He hadn't stolen it, he told himself. He hadn't taken anything yet. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, his fingers brushing against the smooth edges of the wallet. He stopped in front of his building, a towering gray structure that looked older than he was. A few older men stood near the entrance, leaning against the brick wall, talking in low voices. The weight of their silence, as he passed them, felt suffocating. Inside, the building smelled faintly of mildew and the acrid scent of old cleaning supplies. The elevator, an unreliable relic, creaked as it made its way up, and Jaden waited, a strange sensation crawling over him as he gazed out the cracked window. His reflection was distorted, but somehow it felt like it belonged to someone else, someone far away from the world he was living in now. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped in and pressed the button to his floor. The mechanical hum filled the small space. Floor 6. It felt like a lifetime away from the streets. And as the doors closed behind him, the world outside seemed to slip away. The next morning, the weight of the previous day seemed to hang over Jaden like a fog. He woke to the sound of his mother calling from the kitchen, a voice that was both tired and hopeful, like it always was. She was trying to keep things normal, despite everything. Jaden sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. The apartment was dark, save for the weak sunlight streaming through the gaps in the curtains. The smell of burnt toast drifted into the room, mingling with the musty scent that had lingered ever since they'd moved in. He shook his head, trying to shake off the lingering sense of discomfort that had followed him since he found the wallet. There was something unsettling about it, about the way it had been left so carelessly on the sidewalk, and then the strange, lingering presence of the black SUV. His fingers still tingled from where they had touched it. "Jaden, come eat before you go," his mother called again, her voice more insistent now. With a deep sigh, he pushed the blanket off and made his way to the kitchen, the cool air of the apartment clinging to his skin. He could hear his mother humming softly as she flipped pancakes on the stove. A simple breakfast, simple life. That's what it always was, and yet, today, felt different. When he entered the kitchen, his mother was standing there, stirring the batter with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, she said, "What's got you looking like that? You were up late again." Jaden shook his head and sat down at the small table in the corner of the room, his gaze drifting to the chipped mug with the faded logo of his old high school. The same one his mother used every morning. "I'm fine, Ma," he replied, though his voice betrayed a sense of unease. "Just tired." She nodded, understanding more than he said. It was the way she always did, ever since his father left, and even before then, when things were tougher. His mother had always been the strong one, even when she had every reason to crumble. Jaden didn't say anything more, but his mind was still on the wallet. He tried to shake off the feeling, telling himself it was just a thing, a mistake. He was going to throw it away. But even as he thought about it, he knew he wouldn't. The wallet had a kind of power over him now, as if it had become part of something bigger than him. As his mother handed him a plate of pancakes, her face softened slightly. She didn't often show worry, but the lines around her eyes spoke volumes. "Jaden, I need you to be careful today, all right? Things haven't been easy, and I don't want you getting involved in anything that could make it harder." Jaden nodded, but inside, he felt a ripple of guilt. He had no intention of telling her about the wallet. She didn't need to know. Just as he took a bite, a sudden knock, at the door startled both of them. It was loud, forceful, and it made the hair on the back of Jaden's neck stand up. His mother's brow furrowed as she glanced toward the door, her hand tightening around the edge of the countertop. "Who's that?" she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I'll get it," Jaden said, his voice tense. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a slight squeak, and moved toward the door. He wasn't sure why, but something about that knock felt wrong. He opened it cautiously, half expecting it to be one of their neighbors complaining about the noise, or perhaps a delivery they hadn't ordered. But when the door swung open, it wasn't anyone he recognized. Standing on the other side was a man dressed in an expensive suit, his face obscured by the dark sunglasses that seemed too large for his face. His skin was pale, almost unnaturally so, and his jaw was clenched in a way that made Jaden instinctively tense. He wasn't tall, but the confidence he radiated seemed to fill the doorway. "Are you Jaden?" "Jaden Turner," the man asked, his voice smooth, almost too calm. Jaden felt his heart skip a beat, the blood rushing to his ears. "Yeah, that's me," he answered, a knot forming in his stomach. "Who are you?" The man didn't immediately answer. Instead, he glanced behind Jaden, his eyes narrowing as he took in the humble interior of the apartment. "We need to talk," the man said, his tone flat, almost disinterested. "Can I come in?" Jaden glanced back at his mother, who had appeared behind him, her face now pale. She didn't say anything, but took a cautious step back, as if preparing for something bad. No," Jaden said quickly, his voice sounding more confident than he felt. "What's this about?" The man didn't seem bothered by the refusal. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a card. He handed it over without a word, and Jaden hesitated for a moment before taking it. It was a simple black card, with just a few letters embossed in silver. "Call me when you're ready to talk. I'll be around." The man turned on his heel and walked off, his footsteps soft but purposeful. Jaden stood frozen in the doorway, staring down at the card. There was no name, just a phone number. A strange sense of unease crept over him again. Before he could process the moment, he heard the unmistakable hum of an engine, a black SUV, just like the one from the previous day, pulling up to the curb. The tinted windows stared back at him, empty and ominous. Jaden's grip tightened around the card, and the realization hit him hard. Something was happening, something he didn't understand, and it was pulling him in, whether he liked it or not. The morning after the strange visit, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. It had been a day since the mysterious man in the suit had appeared, and Jaden still hadn't called the number on the card. The black SUV had disappeared after a few minutes of idle waiting, but the tension it left lingered. In the back of his mind, he kept replaying the moment, trying to decipher what all meant. Why had the man come to him? Why was he so insistent? And why did his gut tell him he had no idea what he was about to walk into? His mother, on the other hand, seemed to have already moved past it. She went about her day, as she always did, working long hours at the small convenience store down the street, leaving Jaden to figure things out on his own. She was strong like that, never allowing herself to be consumed by worry. It was something he admired, though it sometimes left him feeling isolated. But Jaden knew better than to think everything was as simple as it appeared. Later that afternoon, after school, he decided to take a walk. He needed space to think. His mind was all over the place, a whirlwind of uncertainty, curiosity, and an increasing sense of dread. The air outside was crisp, the sunlight casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, walking aimlessly through the quiet streets of his neighborhood. It wasn't long before he ran into Marcus, his best friend since childhood. Marcus had been through everything with him: the death of his father, the struggles of growing up in a neighborhood where everyone seemed to be running from something. "Yo, what's up, Jaden?" Marcus called, his voice loud enough to break through the low hum of passing cars. He was standing near the corner, leaning against a street lamp with his hands jammed into the pockets of his hoodie. Marcus had always had that laid-back, don't give a damn attitude, a front he put up to mask the pain of his own struggles. Jaden forced a smile. Not much. Just walking around, thinking. Thinking, huh? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Man, you've been acting weird lately. Ever since you found that wallet. What's going on? Jaden stopped in his tracks, unsure of how to answer. Marcus had noticed. He always did. But the thing was, Jaden didn't even know what was going on himself. He could feel the weight of the situation, but putting it into words was harder than he thought. I don't know, man, Jaden said, running a hand through his hair. It's just something about that wallet. It's like it's haunting me, you know? That dude who came by yesterday. I don't know. Marcus pushed himself off the lamp, stepping closer. The suit guy, right? The one with the black car? Dude, that's creepy as hell. You're just gonna ignore it. What if he's part of something big? What if you're in danger? Jaden's stomach twisted at the thought. I don't think he's dangerous. I don't know what he wants. Why would he come to me? What does he want with a kid like me? Marcus's expression softened, his usual bravado slipping for a moment. You've always been the quiet one, Jaden. But I know you. You don't just let things go. If you think there's something weird going on, there probably is. Jaden nodded, appreciating Marcus's loyalty, but still feeling the weight of his mother's advice. Yeah, but Ma's been on me about this. She doesn't want me to get involved with anything. Not after what happened with Dad. At the mention of his father, Marcus's expression shifted. He knew how sensitive Jaden was about it. It was a topic that always created space between them, one neither of them ever really wanted to address, but couldn't avoid. Man, I get it. But this is different, Marcus said, his voice quieter now, as if trying to understand Jaden's inner conflict. You don't have to do this alone. Jaden felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Marcus had been there through everything. But the thought of dragging his best friend into something he didn't fully understand didn't sit right with him. I'm not alone, Marcus, he replied, his voice firm despite the uncertainty in his chest. I just need to figure this out myself. Whatever you say, man. But remember, I'm here when you need me. There was a brief silence between them, the weight of unspoken things hanging in the air. Jaden had always admired Marcus's strength, his unwavering loyalty. But at that moment, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. Later that night, Jaden sat alone in his room, the silence pressing in around him. His mother was working late again, and the apartment felt emptier than usual. His gaze drifted to the card in his hand, the one the man in the suit had left for him. It was still there, tucked between his notebook and a half-empty coffee cup. He hadn't called the number yet, hadn't been able to. Jaden's fingers hovered over the number, but he couldn't bring himself to dial it. He was afraid of what might happen if he did. The fear wasn't of the unknown man. It was of what that call would unlock, of how it would change everything he had known up until that point. He picked up his phone, opened his contacts, and scrolled through the names of people he knew. His mind went to his mother. He could tell her about the man in the suit. She would listen, but she would also worry, and Jaden couldn't stand the thought of putting that weight on her shoulders. Not after everything she had been through. Then there was Marcus. His friend had already made it clear that he wasn't backing down, but Jaden couldn't ask him to be involved in something that could put both of them in danger. With a sigh, Jaden dropped his phone on the bed, leaning back against the wall. His thoughts spun in circles, but no matter how much he tried to push them aside, the one thing he couldn't ignore was the feeling that this wasn't just some coincidence. The man in the suit, the black SUV, the wallet, it was all connected. And Jaden had no idea what he was stepping into. Jaden's heart pounded in his chest as he walked down the dimly lit alley that led to the back entrance of the convenience store. He hadn't been able to shake the feeling of something lingering in the air ever since the black SUV had arrived at his house the previous day. But today it was different. Today, something felt wrong. The sun had set hours ago, and the small neighborhood was cloaked in darkness, its usual rhythm quieted by the approaching chill of the night. It had been a long day of constant thinking, trying to make sense of a situation he found himself in, and the decision he had finally made to visit the store where his mother worked, hoping for some clarity. Jaden had tried calling the number on the business card earlier, but his mind kept freezing each time the phone rang. He had been on the verge of dialing it for hours, his finger hovering over the screen. But it was too much. The questions, the uncertainty, the potential consequences. It all felt like an avalanche ready to bury him. He hadn't told his mom about the mysterious visit, or the card, or the black SUV. She would have been angry, worried, maybe even scared. The weight of everything that had been happening in their lives had already stretched her thin. He didn't want to add any more to her plate, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was drawing him into a situation he had no control over. As he reached the store, the familiar flicker of the fluorescent lights greeted him, and the sound of his mother's voice drifted from the inside as she spoke to a customer. He paused for a moment, his hand resting on the doorframe, before pushing it open. The warmth from inside immediately enveloped him, a stark contrast to the cold outside. "Jaden, you're home early," his mother said, her voice high with surprise. She was standing behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. Her hair was tied in a tight bun, and her tired eyes softened when they met his. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep. Figure I'd come by," he said, his voice quieter than usual. She smiled, but there was something in her eyes, something he had seen 100 times before. She was worried about him. Jaden could feel it, even if she didn't openly acknowledge it. "Your friend Marcus called earlier. He said you haven't been responding to his texts. Is everything all right?" Jaden hesitated, knowing that the lie he was about to tell would only deepen the chasm between him and his mother. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just been busy, you know." His mother didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. She leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "All right, but if something's bothering you, you know you can talk to me. You don't have to carry it alone." Jaden nodded but didn't say anything more. The words felt too heavy to speak. He couldn't bring himself to tell her about the man in the suit, the card, the feeling that the walls around him were closing in. Not yet. Just then, the bell over the door chimed, signaling someone entering. Jaden turned his head instinctively, expecting it to be another customer, but his blood ran cold when he saw who it was. The man in the suit, the same man who had shown up at his house yesterday. He stood in the doorway, his dark sunglasses still perched on his nose, despite the lack of sunlight. His black suit, perfectly pressed, seemed out of place in the small store, as if it had been tailored for an entirely different world. His gaze locked onto Jaden's immediately, and for a split second, Jaden felt like he had been caught in some kind of trap. His heartbeat quickened, and he instinctively took a step back, but the man spoke first, his voice smooth and deliberate. "Jaden, right?" Jaden's stomach dropped. He had been trying to avoid this moment, but now here it was, staring him in the face. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice strained. The man smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "We need to talk. I think it's time we have a conversation." Before Jaden could react, his mother stepped forward, her face, now, filled with concern. "Who are you?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "What's going on here?" The man ignored her, his focus entirely on Jaden. "Come with me. It's important." Jaden opened his mouth to protest, but something in the man's demeanor stopped him. The way he spoke, the way his eyes seemed to see right through him, made it impossible to refuse. He had to know what this was about. It was the only way to get some answers. Without thinking, he turned toward his mother. "I'll be back in a minute," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him with concern, her eyes flickering between Jaden and the man. "Jaden, I don't like this. Don't go with him. Please." But Jaden didn't know how to explain it to her. She couldn't protect him from this. He had to go. He had to know the truth. With one last glance at his mother, Jaden followed the man out of the store. The night air felt colder now, and the shadows seemed longer as they walked down the sidewalk toward a sleek black car parked at the curb. Once they reached the car, the man opened the door and gestured for Jaden to get in. Hesitant, Jaden hesitated for a moment, then climbed into the back seat. As soon as the door shut, the car began to move, its tires humming quietly on the road. "Where are we going?" Jaden asked, his voice steady, though his nerves were beginning to fray. "To find out what you're really capable of," the man replied cryptically. Jaden was about to ask more questions when the man's phone rang. He answered without hesitation, his voice dropping to a lower, more serious tone. "Is it done?" the man asked. There was a pause before the response came through, and Jaden's eyes narrowed, trying to catch the words that were said. But the man's voice grew louder, more urgent. "No, we need to move faster. Make sure he doesn't know what's coming." Jaden's pulse spiked. He hadn't heard a word that had made sense, but he could feel the change in the air. This wasn't about a lost wallet. This was about something much bigger, something much darker. As the man hung up, he turned toward Jaden, his face no longer hidden behind a mask of calm professionalism. There was something darker now, something that made Jaden's stomach churn. "You don't know this yet, but you've just become part of a much bigger game," the man said, his voice laced with something dangerous. Jaden's heart stopped. "What game?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man's lips curled into a smile that sent a chill down Jaden's spine. The game of power. The day after the black SUV arrived, the boy couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. It lingered in the pit of his stomach, gnawing at him with every breath he took. He had never imagined that helping a stranger could lead to such an avalanche of consequences. The encounter had shattered his perception of the world around him, leaving him questioning everything he thought he knew. In the quiet of the night, he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in his thoughts. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Don't trust them, son. People like that never offer anything without expecting something in return." But how could he ignore the possibility that this was his ticket out of the struggles he had known all his life? His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. The man, smooth, polished, with a voice that carried authority, had seemed genuine. But there was always a catch, wasn't there? The boy felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered the calculating gleam in the millionaire's eyes, the way he had promised him a world of opportunity with just a simple act of kindness. The phone buzzed next to him, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. It was a text from the man, the millionaire. He hadn't expected a message so soon. "We need to meet again tomorrow. There's more I'd like to discuss. Let me know when you're free." A tight knot formed in the boy's chest as he read the words. He didn't know if he was ready to dive deeper into this web of intrigue, but something inside him urged him to take the next step. This could be the chance to change everything. Just as he was about to type a response, his mother's voice broke through the quiet. "Who's that?" she asked, her tone edged with suspicion as she stood in the doorway of his room. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the screen. "Just a guy I helped yesterday," he said, trying to sound casual, though his heart raced. "That guy?" She walked into the room, her expression clouded. What does he want now? The boy didn't know how to explain. How could he put into words the strange sense of power he felt after helping someone who seemed so important? The millionaire had made him feel seen, like he mattered. His life, his family's life, had always been a series of small moments of survival, never anything more. But this felt different. "He's just asking to meet again," the boy finally said, carefully choosing his words. "Maybe he can help me with a few things." His mother stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with concern. "No one helps for free," she muttered, her voice low. "I don't trust him. I don't trust anyone like that." The boy felt the weight of her distrust pressing down on him. She had always been protective, always cautious, but it felt different now. There was an edge to her tone, a fear he hadn't heard before. "Why do you always think the worst of people?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Maybe he just wants to help. He's not like the others." His mother's face hardened. "You don't understand, do you? Men like him don't do things out of the goodness of their hearts. There's always a price. And when that price comes due, you'll wish you'd never gotten involved." The boy didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was already a swirl of conflicting emotions. The lure of something bigger, something better, was hard to ignore. But at what cost? The next day, The boy found himself standing at the corner of the street, waiting for the man's black SUV to pull up. His heart pounded in his chest as the vehicle appeared on the horizon, its tinted windows hiding the face of the man who had turned his world upside down in a single moment. The SUV came to a halt in front of him, and the door swung open. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him as he stepped forward, unsure of whether he was making a choice that would shape his future or destroy it. Inside the car, the millionaire greeted him with a smile that seemed too perfect, too practiced. "Glad to see you again," he said smoothly. "I think we can do great things together." The boy hesitated for a moment, looking at the man. Was this really a chance to escape the life he had always known, or was it a trap? The tension in his chest grew as the door of the SUV closed behind him, shutting him in. There was no turning back now. As they drove in silence, the boy could feel the weight of the conversation that was coming. He could sense that the man was testing him, sizing him up. And then, just as the car turned down a quiet street, the millionaire spoke again. "I have an opportunity for you, but it's not without its risks. You're not the only one I've helped. There are others, people who owe me, people who could make your life much easier, but you have to be willing to make the right choices." The boy's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of choices?" The millionaire's smile widened, but there was something cold about it now. "The kind that can change everything. But you'll have to prove you're ready." The car slowed to a stop in front of a large building, its imposing presence standing out against the darkening sky. The boy felt a sense of foreboding settle in his gut. This was the moment where everything could shift. "Get out," the millionaire said, his voice almost gentle, but the command was clear. The boy opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. The man followed, his footsteps heavy behind him. They walked into the building, a lavish space filled with expensive art and polished floors. As they entered a private office, the millionaire motioned for the boy to sit. "This is where the real work begins. Are you ready?" The boy took a seat, his mind racing. He didn't know if he was ready, but he had already come this far. The world was silent, yet it felt as if the very air was charged with electricity, thick, suffocating, as though the heavens themselves were bracing for the final blow. The sky above was no longer a placid canvas, but an angry storm, the first rumbles of thunder in the distance warning of the chaos about to unfold. Jaden stood in the middle of the deserted street, staring at the sleek black SUV parked a few feet away, its headlights glaring like accusing eyes. His hands were clenched, his fists shaking not just with the weight of fear, but with the unbearable weight of truth. His truth, the truth that had been buried for far too long. The door to the SUV opened slowly, and out stepped someone Jaden thought he would never see again. Not like this, at least. "Mr. Black." The voice echoed in the heavy silence, rich and smooth, though tinged with something darker, something threatening. "We meet again." Jaden's heart hammered in his chest. He knew that voice, knew it as well as his own. It was a voice that had once spoken words of kindness, of praise, of promises. Now it was the voice of betrayal. There he was, Brandon, the man who had once seemed like a god to him, towering above him with his wealth, his power, his influence. A man whose life seemed perfect, whose facade was untouchable. But beneath that shining exterior was a truth Jaden couldn't ignore, couldn't suppress any longer. "Why are you doing this?" Jaden's voice was hoarse, a mixture of anger and confusion. His legs felt like they would give out beneath him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had trusted Brandon. He had helped him, had even gone above and beyond for the man, believing in the man's promise of something more. Brandon's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't the friendly grin Jaden once knew. It was cold, calculating. "Because I can," Brandon replied simply, his voice like a velvet hammer. "And because I knew I would need someone like you eventually. A pawn in my game. You were always more useful than you realized." Jaden took a step back, as if the ground beneath him might suddenly swallow him whole. He had seen the signs, felt the strange pull of doubt when things started shifting, when Brandon's smile grew more distant, when the promises became fewer and more hollow. But he had never expected this. He had never imagined Brandon could betray him so completely, with no hesitation, no remorse. How? Jaden whispered. I helped you. I trusted you. Brandon stepped closer, his movements slow but deliberate, his shadow stretching over Jaden like a blanket of doom. The space between them was shrinking, but Jaden stood frozen, the weight of his fear anchoring him to the spot. I told you once, Jaden, Brandon said softly, as if reminiscing over some private joke. The world isn't fair. People like you and me, we don't get to play by the same rules. You were always meant to be a stepping stone, someone to get me what I wanted. And once you were no longer useful, he trailed off with a shrug, as if the rest of the story was irrelevant. You see, this whole game was never about you. Jaden's chest tightened. His heart raced. There it was, the moment of revelation. His trust, his loyalty, all had been squandered for an end he couldn't even comprehend. What are you talking about? Jaden's voice cracked, desperation clawing its way up his throat. Let me be clear, Brandon said, his eyes cold and unblinking. This wasn't ever about helping you, Jaden. This was about me securing my position. You were a tool, a means to an end. And now you're a liability, a loose thread I need to tie up. Jaden's blood ran cold. The words hit him like a blow to the chest. His throat tightened, the full weight of betrayal crashing down around him. It wasn't just business. It wasn't just manipulation. It was cold, calculated destruction. Why did you bring me into this? Jaden asked, the desperation creeping into his voice. He needed answers, needed to understand how everything had gone so terribly wrong. The game had changed, and he was caught in the middle of it. Brandon stepped closer still, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips, but his eyes remained steely, unfeeling. Because you're a wild card, Jaden. You never saw the bigger picture. You never knew what I was really after. But now you do. And now, you're part of it. It's too late to back out. A shiver ran down Jaden's spine. He wanted to turn and run, to escape this nightmare, but his feet were rooted to the spot. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers, but the words caught in his throat. Brandon tilted his head, regarding Jaden like a scientist studying an experiment gone awry. Tell me, Jaden, do you understand now? Do you finally see the truth of it all? Or are you still clinging to the idea of the man you thought I was? The world seemed to spin around Jaden as he tried to make sense of it, to comprehend what had just been revealed. But the truth was undeniable. Brandon had used him from the very beginning. He had twisted Jaden's perception of what was real, had manipulated his every move, knowing that the time would come when Jaden would be forced to see the ugly truth. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Get in the car, Brandon ordered flatly, his eyes never leaving Jaden's face. Jaden's heart stopped. He wasn't just in danger of losing everything. He was already lost. This was it. This was where the path led. Jaden didn't move. He couldn't move. The moments stretched on forever, the weight of Brandon's words hanging in the air, the storm above them reflecting the chaos inside him. Then, with every ounce of strength he had left, Jaden made a choice. You think I'm going to just get in the car? His voice was steady now, despite the storm of emotion brewing inside him. You think you can just throw me away like that? Brandon's smile faded. For the first time, his gaze faltered, just for a moment. But Jaden knew what he had to do. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of purple and orange, like the last remnants of a bruised heart slowly healing. Jaden stood at the edge of the park, his back to the city that had both made and broken him. The weight of everything he just faced sat heavy in his chest, but there was no turning back now. The truth had come crashing down, like the storm that had once threatened to drown him. But he had survived. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking any louder would break the fragile peace that had settled over him. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? His mother's eyes were filled with regret as she stood next to him, the silence between them both comforting and suffocating at once. She had been the one to keep the secret, the truth about his father, the hidden past that had shaped their lives in ways Jaden couldn't have imagined. "It wasn't just my decision, Jaden," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "We thought we were protecting you, but maybe we should have let you in sooner. You were always meant to know." Jaden's eyes hardened, but a part of him knew she was right. There had been a protective barrier between him and the truth for so long, and now that it had been shattered, all he could do was stand there and feel it. The events of the past few days had unfolded like a series of cruel, jarring puzzles, the pieces clicking into place one by one. The betrayal, the lies. And yet, as painful as it had been to discover the truth, Jaden found that it didn't destroy him. No, it was something else. Something far more profound. He wasn't the same person he had been before. He had learned that the world didn't owe him fairness, and people, no matter how much he trusted them, were capable of unspeakable things. But the most crucial lesson had been this: revenge, no matter how sweet it seemed, would only destroy him further. His father had made his mistakes, and Jaden now understood that holding on to that anger would only consume him, just as it had consumed the others in his life. There was no peace to be found in vengeance. The door behind him creaked open, and he turned to see his sister Mia, stepping out into the quiet evening, her expression uncertain but hopeful. She had always been his anchor, the one person who understood him even when the world seemed too harsh. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice a balm to his wounded soul. Jaden looked at her for a long moment, the corners of his lips lifting in the faintest of smiles. "Yeah, I think so." She took a few steps closer, then hesitated, sensing the depth of what he had just endured. What happens now? He thought about it for a moment, his gaze still distant, caught in the final threads of everything that had happened. The past was written in stone, but the future? The future was his to define. I think I finally know who I am," Jaden said quietly, almost to himself. Mia nodded slowly, as if recognizing the weight of his words. "And what does that mean?" "It means that I can't keep letting other people control my life," he answered, turning his gaze to her. "I can't keep letting the past hold me hostage." For a brief moment, the city seemed to pause around them, the hum of distant traffic fading into the background as they stood there together, their shared silence a bond stronger than anything words could convey. The moment passed, and Jaden took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of freedom fill his lungs. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic resolution that could make everything right again, but somehow, in that quiet, introspective moment, he knew that he was moving forward. And that was enough. As Jaden reflects on his journey, he is faced with the profound realization that life is not about the battles we fight, but the ones we choose to leave behind. His growth stems from letting go of anger, embracing the complexity of human nature, and finding peace in acceptance. The story doesn't offer a fairy tale ending, but rather a bittersweet truth. In order to heal, we must confront our past, not with the desire for revenge, but with the capacity for understanding. The moral implication here is clear. Holding on to the past can chain us to the very thing we want to escape, and forgiveness isn't about letting others off the hook, but releasing ourselves from the grip of pain. Jaden's journey shows that the key to growth is often letting go, choosing to move forward even when the past tries to drag us back.